I have a call in 15 minutes, so that's pretty much going to define the length of this podcast. I have to keep it under 15 minutes and run off to the call. Anyway, so we're in the typology of cities, looking at urban resilience and where we are. So we already mentioned the typologies: small, medium, large cities with low, middle and upper level income. So these are the income groups: middle income, high income and overall. And we have small, medium and large cities in both cases. There are the number of cities, median size, median GDP per capita, and large cities have higher median per capita GDP, and similarly here also in the high income level. So this is middle income, high income. Large cities come with larger incomes in terms of per capita GDP. Here are the 5 most populous cities. So here Chinese cities show up profusely in all categories, so I won't read all of those, but you know most of them. In global typology, severity of challenges by city size and country income group. So you can keep track of the way we are using typologies. The country income level matters, the city income level, city development, city size matters, and exposure of course is related to population density as well, but then larger cities have higher per capita GDP, better services, etc. as well, more inclusive in many ways. So we have to use all those to see how the challenges end up deciding the outcome on the impact, right? So city size, so carbon pollution and vegetation, resilience and poverty, inequality. So these are the code words we used before: inequality, services, severe challenge, moderate challenge, and so on. So here is severity: high, moderate and low. So depending on whether you are low income and depending on whether what size city you are facing various levels of challenges. Vegetation is low should correspond to pollution as well as emissions. So here all 3 are kind of low or moderate, but resilience is moderate. So high resilience here because you have all these are low, and so on. So similarly in middle income and high income countries, there is a smorgasbord of combinations of these various factors in global typology, resilience and impacts. Okay, I won't go into the many details, but it's worth looking at the various factors that go into determining the challenges. So service challenge exists, resilience, poverty, services, resilience, poverty and services, pollution, inequality. So you have moderate challenges and severe challenges here, and you can see carbon, vegetation, poverty, poverty and inequality, vegetation, inequality, and so on and so forth. So this is good to have in terms of monitoring progress. Again, you over time you want to enhance resilience, reduce poverty and improve services, right? Reduce pollution, reduce inequality, and reduce emissions, increase vegetation, reduce poverty. So all of these you have to track in terms of typologies, and obviously these are global composites, so they are typologies because they are common characteristics across global cities, even though the definition of cities are not so uniform. Moving to the intersection between urban challenges and climate shocks and stresses. The wind is getting really strong. Greenness, so intersection with climate shocks and stresses. Greenness interacts with emissions. Obviously higher the greenness, lower the emission, and that assists pollution as well. And vegetation is of course directly related to greenness, but vegetation can also encompass nature-based solutions which can then blunt together the impact of storm surges from tropical cyclones, provide retention for floods and reduce ambient heat and so on. So depending on whether you are a coastal city or inland city, vegetation always helps. And resilience, of course, resilient cities experience lower economic losses from climate change related shocks and stresses because fewer disruptions of basic services and quicker recovery. And as shown by this report's analysis of nighttime lights data based on the work of Park and Roberts. So nighttime lights data, as we said before, is an indicator of how city has returned to normalcy after climate perturbation. Urban challenges, intersection with climate shocks and stresses, again inclusiveness, so poverty, inequality and services. Poor population may face an exposure bias to climate change related hazards such as floods by, for example, living in slums in floodplains, and to heat stress by having less access to air conditioning and less green space in poor areas, among other things. Here, adaptation can also include providing shelters, healthcare, hydration, etc. for poor people based on early warnings. So early warnings are a key tool in dealing with these issues of inclusiveness. Inequality, poor populations may incur disproportionately higher losses when affected by shocks and stresses. And services, lack of basic services is a cross-cutting challenge that can exacerbate the impacts of shocks such as floods, lack of drainage, as well as water stress, so lack of drinking water supply, and heat stress, so lack of energy for air conditioning or access to air conditioning at all. And of course these always result in health impacts as well. Okay, so what are the conclusions from this urban typologies and challenges and income levels and various factors like greenness, resilience and inclusiveness? Building on the insights in Chapter 1, this chapter classifies the global sample of cities analyzed in this report into 9 types based on the population size of the cities, so small, medium and large, and the level of development of the countries in which they are located, low, middle and high income. Country level income. The resulting typology highlights the heterogeneity across different types of cities in the mix and severity of their current urban challenges, as well as in the level of exposure to climate change related hazards projected forward to 2030 to 2040. Very strong breeze, sorry about that. Although cities in high income countries face moderate to severe challenges in reducing CO2 emissions and intra-city inequality, those in low and middle income countries are confronted with moderate to severe challenges in dealing with air pollution, poverty and universal access to basic services, as well as economic resilience to climate shocks and stresses. Consistent with that lack of access and low economic resilience, the analysis of data from Moody's ESG, that is Environmental, Societal and Governance Solutions, predicts that over the next 2 decades, the lower a city's level of development, the higher its exposure will be to the overall level of climate change related hazards. Seems intuitive, but still we have to track those. So we will continue with part 2, what do we know? So where are we was part 1. We looked at a couple of chapters, and we'll move to what do we know in the next podcast. I will leave this podcast here, even though it's a bit short, just because I have a phone call coming. So I will see you in the next podcast looking at what do we know. So we will look at the impacts of climate and environmental change on cities. So we are saying cities are disproportionately high contributors to emissions, but they are also innovation centers and innovation ecosystems, employment providers, and generally attract migrants for better livelihood dreams. And then they have their own problems. We are looking here at enhancing their resilience, greenness, inclusiveness, and so on. So obviously, what do we know is very important in terms of impacts of climate and environmental change on cities, which can of course be used or should be used and need to be used for enhancing resilience in the end. Okay.